All right, Idle here. Today I want to talk about GT Spacetime Beam. Want to go over which platforms the beam is stable on, why it's stable on some platforms versus other platforms where it's unstable. Is there anything we can do about that? And finally, at the end, we'll go over a little tutorial on the actual route or specific setups we use for the Spacetime Beam. In fact, when I talk about the beam being stable or not stable, I'm assuming that you're using a specific setup. If you just run around, so right now I've got the space-time beam enabled. If you just run around shooting the beam without any setup, you're probably going to crash the game, or you might end up like just falling forever and ever. And who knows? Maybe you'll get lucky and this takes you somewhere. Maybe. But the point is, it matters a lot which room you're in, where you're standing in that room, how you're positioned, which way you fire the beam. All of those things make a big difference in how the space-time beam operates. So you really should be using specific setups. That said, even if you're using a specific setup, there are some platforms where the beam is not stable. Most emulators are stable. So if you're using the Nintendo Virtual Console or SNES Classic, I believe the Switch, those are all stable as far as I know. The SNES 9X emulator is stable. The BSNES or Hygen is not stable. Now, if you're using a hardware emulation like a Super NT or the Mister, those I'm not actually sure about that. I was asking around. I haven't heard definitively. I don't have those systems, so I don't know for sure. Um, and then finally, console is not stable. Although you have one of these guys. Let's see if I can hold it up here to my garbage camera here. SD2SNES or FxPak or FxPak Pro, there may be a way that we can make it stable. So I'm going to talk more about that later. In fact, if first I think it's important to go over the technical explanation on like why are they different? Why do we allow we actually allow both? So you can run um, now even on an unstable platform such as console, you can still complete a run. You just need to get a little lucky. It doesn't always fail. Sometimes it does. You are able to get through the beam setup and finish the game. I believe Zost had the world record for some time with the route being done on console. I believe currently the world record's being held by Sisreem. I can't pronounce that name correctly. Um, and that was done in SNES Classic. And you might wonder, well, why do we allow both platforms? And I think it's a good question. I mean, there's kind of a default thought that if the platform is released by Nintendo, that's a good reason to support it. But there's also a good technical reason for it too. So I think it's important to go with the technical reasons. That said, if you're not interested in the technical explanation um, and you just want to know how to make your console stable, go ahead and skip ahead one chapter. I'm going to post this on YouTube. Skip ahead to the next chapter. If you already are on a stable platform, maybe you are using the SNES Classic or you're on SNES 9X emulator, go ahead and skip ahead two chapters and we'll go over the tutorial section. Or actually, probably I'll put that off into a shorter video as well. So a couple options there. So with that out of the way, I'm going to dive into the technical explanation. I warned you, you can skip this if you want. Let's see here. So I think it would help to pull up the code here. Actually, it might help to look and see what space-time beam is. So the space-time beam is the charge ice, spacer, and plasma combination. And the key here is that we have both a spacer and plasma selected. Whereas normally you can't do that. In fact, if I unselect this and now I try to select it, now I can't get back into my mode. There's some trick you can do about I don't even remember the trick. You push these buttons at the same time or something. There's some way to get this to trigger to get it back, but fortunately when you do the GT code, it just gives you both spacer and plasma selected. It actually defaults to this when you enter the GT code. This is not the Spacetime beam. This beam will generally crash, is my understanding. So turn it back to Spacetime beam. And what's happening is, since the game was never designed to execute with both of these beams enabled, there's a lot of places where the code just wasn't written, and it does cause at one point in the execution the code jumps somewhere that it's not supposed to jump. And so I'm going to go ahead and bust out the assembly here. So even if you don't know any assembly, if you have any software background at all, worked with any programming language, even something as simple as Python, there's actually a chance you'll be able to understand this, because once I point out that this is a memcopy loop, so all we're doing is copying a bunch of data from the source to a destination. And once you know that, this code's actually, I think you'll be able to follow along. You kind of see it starts with, we're loading 0. So you think of like a loop, you start at 0 and you go until the end of your data. So if you've got 100 bytes, you start from 0 and you go to 100. So we've got those, we start out loading 0, and then we have the actual copy. So we read some memory and we write, so a load and a store. And then we increment our variables, our x. Instead of having like an I variable, we have an x and a y, so we increment both of those. We compare to, hey, did we get to the end of our loop? Did we get all the data we want? If we didn't, loop back to the beginning. If we are done, that last RTS there is just a return. So we're done with this function. So a very simple function here. Now the red line is where the code jumps to if you fire a charged space-time beam shot. And the interesting thing about that is, you can see we've skipped over the beginning where we've initialized x and y to 0, which means they could be whatever values they want. And typically the y value is going to be a large negative number, like negative 20,000 something. So that's going to cause this loop to run a lot, and it's going to overwrite a lot of memory, and that's how Spacetime Beam has all of the crazy effects that it does. And so it's somewhat fortunate that it actually makes a jump into this loop where it can actually not crash and have all these fun effects. And the green thing, so for those green lines there, I wanted to highlight, when we're doing this copy paste of this read from source, write to destination, sometimes the source is not valid. We're copying so much data that source, we didn't initialize X either. So where we're reading from isn't really where we're supposed to be reading from. And sometimes there's not even memory there. So you call the load and there's nothing to be returned. And when that happens, it just returns whatever is on the bus. We call that an open bus read. Like it's just, and it happens to be the last byte of execution. So if we look at that assembly, it's B700. That 00 is what we're going to read. And I always think it's funny. If we look at the instruction, the load A with the $00 that's just a variable that the Deer Force developers picked. They could have picked 02, 04, they could have picked 1A. There's a lot of options they could have picked for that variable. But thankfully they picked 00, because it turns out that 00 is a safe value. That when we're writing, all this memory we're overwriting, some of it really needs to be either zeros or sane values. If it's anything other than 0 or a sane value, it's just going to crash. And so if the developers had picked any other variable to use here, Spacetime category probably wouldn't exist. Maybe we'd have GT Classic, but no Spacetime category. But thankfully they picked 0. So okay, if the code is set up for us, and it's set up to return this nice 0 value a lot of the time, and it's a generally a safe value, why is console unstable but your emulator stable? And actually, the truth is that if you're in a room like this, the room I'm in right now, let's just a second. There we go. Room I'm in right now. This a space-time beam shot from here can be stable. So if I set it up, this particular one is a little fancy. We actually got it. This is the last one, so we turn the space-time beam off for this one. Again, I'll explain this more in the tutorial section. You can see we're doing all these copies. Samus is very sluggish here. She's falling very slowly. That's partly because of the all of those the read and writes are lagging the system down. You can see we got through here. And we successfully got to the end of the game. So, and I can do this again. I can do this all day. It's going to be stable. The beam part of it is going to be stable on console. But now let's say I run over to a different shot. This one is notoriously unstable on console. Let's see what happens over here. Oh, we crash. And you'll notice we didn't even crash right away. We actually got through a couple of frames. We need to get through 4 frames, at least 4 frames, in order to make this jump work on console. And it's just, it doesn't happen very often. Oh, we almost made, I thought we were going to make that one. There, that one went through. Oh, it gave us the funny transition too. That's very rare. I'm really glad we caught that on video where it didn't fade the screen to black. So this was a successful. This was successful. Oh man, 2 in a row. This is what it usually looks like when it fades to black. So sometimes you get a few in a row. But more often than not, it's going to crash here. And it's unfortunate because this is like 15 minutes into your run, and there's not anything you can do to control it without a modification. Again, we're going to talk about that modification for console later. The reason why it's unstable in this room has to do with the fact that it's a heated room. Now, if we look at this background, you can see we have this wavy effect going on. So normally, the entire screen is rendered ahead of time. In fact, if you ever have a lag frame, what's happening is the game was about 95%, might have been close to being done, maybe 95% done figuring out what the next frame should look like, but it didn't get all the way done. When it's time to, but we're on a clock, you know, we're trying to render to a CRT or a TV. It's got to be 60 hertz. If you're late, you're late. It's like, you know what? I'm not done figuring out what Samus should be doing. We're just going to do the exact same frame again, and we'll figure it out, and then we'll give you a frame next time. And that's what creates lag frames, is whenever the SNES falls behind, doesn't get the frame done in time. But once it is done in time, it just goes about its business and writes it out, and there's nothing interesting there. But these wavy effects, to do these wavy effects, it actually does interrupt as it's in the middle of drawing a line on the screen. It'll do an interrupt and it will do some fancy stuff to make that wavy effect happen like that. And unfortunately for us, that interruption can happen not only in the middle of our loop here, but also it can interrupt, like it's like mid-instruction. So we've decided we want to do a read. We tell the processor, hey, go out and get that data. It again, if you're reading from an invalid area of memory, it's going to give us that open bus value, which should be 0 because that's the last thing we put on the bus. But now we get an interruption to deal with this heat effect. And that's going to put something different on the bus. So then when we come back, the value is not 0 anymore. Now, it's not necessary. There are a lot of places where writing a non-zero value, writing some ones, it's not a big deal. But there are a few places where if you write a 1, it's just over. You know, so you can imagine like you can pick your favorite war movie battle example. You can imagine like you're like running from one side of a field to the other and a whole bunch of people are firing bullets. That's almost what it's like. All these heat effects that we see in the background are like the bullets, and um, you're pretty likely going to get hit. But you're also wearing armor in this analogy, so most of the time the bullet's going to hit some of your armor and glance off. But if it ever hits a place that's kind of a vulnerable place, in between the armor, then you're just going to get a crash. So this is just literally just rolling the dice here. And unfortunately, this particular one, you're rolling the dice 4 times, 4 frames. You got to run through that field like 4 times. So the reason why it's there stable on emulator is because this behavior of interrupting a read in the middle is not that common. And the other thing is that you wouldn't, might not be, I guess there's 2 reasons. One is the hardware just might not do that. It might not implement that interrupt the same way. The other reason is probably an emulator, you don't want to do an open bus read. You're basically reading from who knows where. So, if you were to imagine if you're an SNES 9X program and you're running on Windows or whatever, and you do a read to an out of bounds area of memory, I mean, the program might just crash. So the SNES 9X developers didn't want it to crash, so they probably put in behavior of, hey, if you're trying to read from a area of memory that isn't supposed to exist, just do the open bus behavior. I see it's supposed to be a 0 here, return 0. And that's most likely what they did on the Virtual Console and SNES 9 NSES Classic. It's just the logical thing to do from a development standpoint. If you're trying to emulate this SNES hardware, this is what you would do. You would just have it default to returning 0 or default to returning whatever you think the open bus value should have been. And again, even on like the Nintendo Switch, like even if they let it do an open bus read, it just, the hardware might handle these instructions differently. Maybe it finishes the instruction before the interrupt, and then you get the 0 that way. Or maybe it actually interrupts and like throws away the load instruction, and you got to redo the load instruction. And in either of those cases, you're not going to be doing a mid-instruction interruption, and therefore you're going to get the 0 value. And if we go back to our war analogy, if your system is going to return 0 all the time, it doesn't matter how many bullets are flying. It doesn't matter that this heat effects are going on. You might as well have a big, huge shield across the entire field that's saving you. You don't have to worry about it. And so it's going to be stable all the time. And so that kind of explains why most emulators are stable, but SNES console is not stable. So now I want to start preparing for the next segment here. If I do one thing in my OBS real quick. Okay. So I mentioned this Spacetime beam is not stable on console, but if you have this guy, SD2S NES, or the rebranded version FxPak, or maybe you've got the FxPak Pro, there may be something we can do about it. So remember, a lot of times when people talk about running on console, they talk about excuse me, I'm taking a sip. Sorry about that. When people talk about running on console, they usually think of running like all original stuff, original hardware, original controller, and original cartridge. Of course, the original cartridge is actually this guy. So, but a lot of times runners who are on console, they will run with this FxPak Pro because it provides, or SD2S NES because it provides, you can do like auto splitting, the FunTune integration. Like there's a lot of things you can do with it, which are convenient. You can do like the save states that I've been doing. So like when I'm running around and I want to load back to here. By the way, if anybody's wondering why I have both an FxPak Pro and an SD2 NES, I don't know if you can see these ports here. That there's the cartridge, the micro SD port, that's still there, and what's supposed to be a USB port, you might be able to tell the USB port is not there. So just a little public service announcement. Take care of your stuff. That's why I have another one. But anyway, the point is that this not only isn't the same as this, it's just emulating it. This can also emulate other types of cartridges for the SNES. They're not all the same. And the interesting thing about that is we can configure this to pretend it has more memory than it actually has. So remember I was saying that when we're in the middle of this copy, we try to read from somewhere that's not valid on this cartridge, and then we get the open bus read. But what if this guy said, oh yeah, I've got memory there, and it's 0? In that situation, we're no longer using the open bus behavior, we're using an actual value returned by the cartridge, and that avoids the problem. Even if you have this heat effect interruption going on, like all this wavy stuff going on, all those bullets in the field, if this guy returns a 0 anyway, it saves the day. So it's basically trying to do the same thing that other emulation does, like SNES 9X or SNES Classic. And when you consider this is emulation, I don't see the problem. Now, I do need to raise a caveat here. This firmware mod for this has not been approved by the speedrunning community. If you use the regular firmware, then you're fine. But if you use this modified firmware that I have, that hasn't been approved yet. And a couple reasons. One is the firmware is specific to Super Metroid, so actually I'm just going to go ahead and start swapping that out now. As I'm talking about this, it's actually not that hard to do the firmware update. Got to pull out my micro SD card, put in a little adapter here, so plug it into my computer. I can't really show you what I'm doing on my computer, but I did prepare a little image of the files that I'm replacing. It's these two files. Now, an important point to know here, you can see here, these are the original. I took a snapshot of the original. My firmware is from July of 2021. And the files that I'm going to copy on here were made in, let's see here, I have it here, March of 2022. And I know that they are compatible. And I know they're compatible with this older guy too. But if you have a brand new FxPak Pro or a pretty new one, there is a possibility that the files that I have aren't compatible with that very latest stuff. Now, I don't think it's going to brick your unit or anything, but disclaimer, be careful. You might want to do some research online and try to figure out if replacing this FPGA base file with an older version is going to be a problem for those newer brand new FxPak Pro cards. Because my understanding is they did change something about the firmware, then they needed to change it. So, and then these files I have might not have those changes that you need. But assuming you have compatibility here, all you do is copy and replace these files. I'm doing it right now. Eject your card. Put this back in here. Oh, by the way, I know this has a cheats folder on it. It's empty. I don't know why it's there. I swear I'm not using any cheats. Forgot to mention that. Although it was kind of funny. I thought about deleting it, but then I thought, well, it's there. Maybe it needs it for some reason, or maybe it's just going to put it back. And that's all that there is to the upgrade process. My understanding is that every time you launch up an FxPak Pro or the SD2 and SES, it's actually copying that FPGA file every single time. It's not using one that it already has installed. And so the update process is super easy. You just put a new file on there. And you can do the same thing. I should have mentioned it. Definitely back up your original files. You put your original files back. And now if I do this, it's going to work every time. So why would this not be approved by the community? For one thing, this fix is tailored towards Super Metroid. In fact, if you're using any other game, I would not recommend this firmware update. It's the way it's implemented. It's specifically reading like a specific byte off of the SNES ROM or the Super Metroid ROM. So if you put a different game in, it might not behave the same way. The other thing, I gotta go back and pull up my original. The other reason is that we make some assumptions that when we're reading from this out of bounds memory, it's always done the same way, which for GT Spacetime, we know that to be true. But what if you're doing like some other glitch? Like being out of bounds is fine. Like right now, it doesn't matter whether I'm using the firmware update or not, as far as I can tell. But if I were to start using X-ray out here, then it's, that can also mess with stuff. And so that makes it a little bit more complicated. Hey, Kev, thanks for the raid. Just going over how to patch your SNES console hardware. In fact, I already covered that part, so if I need to make a little short video, I can end it here for that. So, yes, Kev, actually, I'm going to get to the, I was just going to get to the tutorial section of this video. In fact, I'm trying to think of why I wouldn't do that. I was just going to wrap this up section up real quick. So this firmware mod that I'm doing for the SNES, SD2 SNES, I only recommend this for categories, for Super Metroid categories that use Spacetime Beam. It should be fine in any percent runs, but there's also no reason to use the firmware update in any percent runs, so I wouldn't recommend it for that. But for Spacetime, in my opinion, it should be fine, but it has not been approved by the speedrun community yet, so it might not be an official speedrun. You might not be able to put it on the leaderboard. But if you just want to do the category, that works too. Oh yeah, no problem, Kev. I'm just going to be covering the same stuff that's in the wiki, basically, but it'll be all in one video. Speaking of which, I'm probably going to make that GT Spacetime tutorial video a separate video. So I'm going to kind of redo the intro a bit here. So if you're wondering why I'm redoing the intro, that's what that's about. In fact, I think we can get into that. All right. Let's talk about, oh, yep. Hang on, I gotta do one more thing before I switch over to tutorial mode. There we go. Gotta update the title. All right, welcome for this brief tutorial about the GT Spacetime route. I'm going to focus specifically on the GT Spacetime beam shots. So I'm going to assume that you know how to do GT Classic already, and this is just a deviation from that. I'm also assuming that you're on a stable platform. So if SNES 9X, SNES Classic, the Switch should be stable, Virtual Console should be stable. If you're on regular console like I am, I've applied the patch already. So never jump up here. On console, this particular beam is very unstable normally, but I've applied my patch here, so I am going to be having some stable behavior at this point. You can do the run even with it being unstable. It is possible to complete the run on console. It's just that particular beam shot tends to crash, and the first one can crash as well. It's just something to be aware of. And I've got other videos on that, or you can watch the full GT Spacetime Explained video if you want to have both that full explanation and this tutorial all in one video. All right, so first things first, let's go to our presets. We want to do GT Classic. Select that here. We want You can pick either one of these, bootless or high jump, doesn't really matter. We want to go to the GT code preset. And of course, we're going to enter the code the same as you would in a GT Classic run. The code is just the 4 face buttons. So once you enter the door, during the transit, like as the screen's fading out, you want to go ahead and get your code in. You want to be holding only the 4 face buttons, no D-pad, no select, none of the other buttons, no triggers. You hold it through the scrolling, like as the door scrolls from one side of the room to the other. And then once it's done scrolling, you let go. So let's do that. And if you did it correctly, you'll notice that we have Gravity Suit. So we entered with Varia, we exited with Gravity Suit. If we go to our pause menu, we see we have this specific set of health, ammo, all the items except Screw Attack, and all the beams. And then for Spacetime, so normally you would turn off Spacer for a GT Classic run. For Spacetime, we want to turn off Wave instead. This gives us the Spacetime beam. Now, one important thing you want to do, you want to make sure that you are not holding the shot. Like, you need to let go of these buttons at some point. So let's just say I hold on to the buttons too long. Now I crashed. And that's because I'm holding onto the shot button, and I'm going to fire a shot, and I don't even have the Spacetime beam selected yet. I've got some other glitched beam. So that's no good. So you want to make sure you've got plenty of time. Some people recommend like being in morph, so that way if you were to fire a shot, you just do a bomb. But the truth is you have plenty of time to release those buttons. Once it stops scrolling, you just release them. I was a little bit late to hold the buttons there, but it's still in time. Okay. So now what we do for this first shot, we're going to charge a shot, and then while it's charged, we're going to switch to supers. And that kind of like buffers up a charge shot, but it's also going to make it only fire once. It's a specific setup. We're going to do that a couple of times. So let's see what that looks like. Charge, and then switch over to supers. And you can kind of ignore GT. You're normally going to do this fast enough that he's not really in the way. You can see like I'm not even doing anything. He's not even really getting in my way. Well, that was kind of an interesting effect that's happening there. Okay, so now what we're going to do, if you wait too long, you might have to wait for GT to stop what he's going to do. We're going to do a jump, and then right about here, maybe a little bit before this point, it is right about here. We're going to fire our super. Right about there, where Samus, like it's like she's kind of halfway between the door tile and the wall. That's about where we want to fire our super. So let's do that. Okay, if we did it correctly, Samus is going to be standing like this in midair, and then all we have to do is morph, roll to the right. You can see GT. GT was still there making sounds, but it wasn't on screen anymore. The GT Spacetime beam changes a lot. In fact, we can look at that. It's by the way, it's when you do that, it's going to cause all these crazy ones to appear on the top of your screen. That's going to happen in the real game as well. I don't really care for that though. So what we can do is we can go to sprite features and we can set that Spacetime to preserved, and then that won't happen anymore. And we can also use the sprite features to turn on the out of bounds viewer if we want to see a little bit more what's going on. So now when we go back, we see all these like lines here. So let's just do that. Charge the beam. This is a little bit laggy now because I've got this viewer on. There we go. And we could see, for the most part, all this different stuff is around us. In fact, this is actually the reason we have to morph. You can see there's a yellow block next to us. We can't, so that blue rectangle that's moving around here is Samus. You see I can morph and I can jump. That little blue box is moving around. We want to get to the yellow box over to the right. So we morph and we roll over here. We get those yellow boxes over there. That's a transition block and takes us in here. And we can see like these yellow blocks over here represent the door. You see these different blocks represent different things. And so if you ever wanted to look at it with the out of bounds viewer, that's an option. Okay, so now that we're here, we generally want to stay morphed. Remember, we got all these items so we can use spring ball to our advantage. We just jump up and lay the bomb here. And then we're going to be right here. And we're going to, again, charge up a beam. We need to do it angled up and left. Again, switch to supers. And then fire. You can see, like, that room just kept shifting around. The space-time beam actually took effect like 3 or 4 times for that. Let's do it again. Let's do it again without the sprite features on. So we'll have to do both jumps here. So again, hold your key combo, pause, turn wave off, charge beam, switch to supers, jump. We got that fun effect. Sometimes that happens where the game doesn't fade out when you do this. I'm not exactly sure why that happens. Sometimes not. Most of the time it does. It will fade out normally. I've seen that a few times in the practice ROM here. Yeah, isn't that kind of funny? It's even more funny when the second transition does it. Lay this bomb here. Come up here. Charge our beam again. Fire the super. And don't do anything. I've seen some instructions online to turn like right or like, I don't even know, crouch or whatever. Like, you don't do it. Once you fire the shot, you just let go of the controller, let it do its thing. You don't have to turn right. I think that's just somebody was superstitious or something. I've never seen that have any effect. Okay, now we're out of bounds. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and save and turn the sprite viewer back on so we can see where we're at. So we can jump around. Can run over here if we want. Oh, look, there we are. We got on screen. So what we actually want to do is we want to fall down this area over here, which we can't do until we're morphed. So you're going to morph. You're going to roll off. We can actually see Samus there when we roll off. You can jump again if you want to see Samus. This might be a good way to see where you are too. So if you're having some trouble with this and you want to see some cues, some people use a sound cue to like tell, like as she rolls off that platform, she makes a sound, and when she hits the ground, she makes a sound usually. You want to jump to see where you are. Now we need to roll in. We need to roll in right here. We need to roll off to the left and then roll to the right and hit one of those transition blocks. And if we do it correctly, we'll end up in this room. And then now if we go over here to the ship, you can see that we can't beat the game yet, but at least we're back in bounds, and we've warped all the way from Lower Norfair to the beginning of the game, back here at the landing site. Now, if you do mess this up, if you're a little late, that was really late. Yes, you can fall down in here too, and you're probably going to be in trouble. You might run into a crash block. I think this room like repeats. Yeah, this is going to take you somewhere, and now you're like in a wall somewhere. Where'd my sprite viewer go? Wow, I don't even have any tiles, so I don't know where I'm way far away. The rooms always repeat, yeah. So you do need to hit the correct transition. I was trying to show a different one, actually. Yep, that's the correct one. If you hit a little bit... Oh, there's one you can hit. That's a crash block. So if you go left, like right away. Oh yeah, there's another one over there. I missed it. It's kind of fun using this tile viewer. Oh yeah, that's that crash block again. Let me try this one. I think one of these is... Yeah, this takes us back here again. Now at least I'm see I'm like in the middle of a wall here. So you're not going anywhere. You're in a wall. The one that's probably easiest to hit, unless you're trying to do a demo, because I swear I hit this a lot in practice and now I'm not hitting it at all, is this one. You end up over here. Now there's supposedly some way to get out of this room. Um, I think you need to get to this door transition over here. I can't do it. I don't know what you're supposed to, I don't know if like I'm in spikes or something or some weird slope platform, but I just cannot. I cannot get out of this room. Yeah, I don't know how to do it. Somehow you gotta open this door, I think. This is a soft lock for me if I get stuck here. So you do want to practice getting this movement right. We roll off here. See where you are. Roll left for about a second. Go back right. See, I was too late there. Once you roll off, you got to go back on it. It's easier to do with this viewer, but of course you're going to need to practice without having the viewer. You want to get back here. So let's turn the viewer off. Practice a little bit without the viewer on. Roll. See Samus. Left for a little bit, maybe about a second, and then back to the right. Let's do that again. Morph, roll to the right. You could use that screen scroll as a cue potentially too. So it's not too bad, but it is something that needs a little bit of practice. Okay, so now we're going to head over to the right here. Make sure you have either missiles or supers equipped. You do not want to be killing these guys with your beam. That's just going to crash the game. I'm also going to go ahead and kill these crabs. This particular jump is known to be a little bit less stable, even on emulator. And one of the theories is that these crabs are... Because the whole landscape of this room is going to change, and everything's going to start falling, including these crabs. And the theory is maybe these crabs hit a bad block. You know, they're crawling around this wall, so they clearly are checking for collisions. And the theory is that they check for a collision at a bad time, and it causes a crash. So just for stability, I'm going to go ahead and kill those crabs. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go up against this wall. We want to bonk this wall. So we're flush with that wall when we land. Then we're going to turn around. We are going to start firing our beam. While we're charging it like this, we're going to pause. And we're going to turn off everything except for charge. Now remember, when you unpause, make sure you start holding the shot button again so you don't fire it. We do an angle up and release the shot. And then again, we just let go of the controller. We fall. We let Samus do her thing. She's usually going to bounce right there. And into this transition, it looks like, well, weren't we just here? It's the same place we were just at, right? It's the same room over here. Remember, we turned off the Spacetime beam now. We just have charge beam selected, so we can fire shots again. But if we come over here, magically, the game thinks it's over. So normally you'd have earthquakes going on, lightning flashing. I turned all that off for the sake of the YouTube video. But yeah, we just enter the ship. And instead of giving us a refill and save, it's off and away. It does not matter that the timer isn't running. The game's complete. So let's do that again. In fact, this time let's turn on the viewer, the sprite viewer. So flush with this wall, turn, charge shot, pause, charge only, angle up, shoot. You can see we're like in the middle of nowhere here, but eventually Samus is going to catch up with some blocks and falls right into that one there. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be able to demo this. Sometimes Samus gets knocked off of her. It's like she gets knocked off of her line. I'll just try to do it intentionally here. So as you're falling, let's see here. I'll try moving over to the left. Yeah, so, oh, I didn't land in the right spot. I'm over here. And there are some damage blocks in here too. We need to get to this transition. If you can find it, you can save it. Let's see if we can demo that. We'll give it another try or two. So I'm going to turn the viewer off, and I'm going to go ahead. This time I'm going to... Oops. Yeah, don't do that. Don't fire beam shots when you still have your space beam active. Fire missiles. I'm going to see if I can do it. Maybe I'll just leave the enemies around. See what happens if we don't kill the enemies. But usually this works anyway, even if the enemies are present. Yeah, worked no problem. So I'll give this another couple tries. I don't know if I'm going to be able to save this, like, with that happening. You do want to kill those key hunters so that does not happen. Oh, geez, we got knocked off right there. That's going to be fun. Yeah, so now we're not quite where we should be. But we're able to get back to this. Ooh. Ooh, but we ended up out of bounds. Yeah. That can happen too. Where are we? That was weird. I wonder why we couldn't see Samus. Okay, so that particular out of bounds might be savable. Let's turn this back off. Let's kill these guys. You really should take the 2 seconds and kill these guys. It's more interesting having the crabs still be in the room. I would recommend not killing the crabs if this were like a speed run. It's not worth it. Because this trick works most of the time anyway. But if you were like doing a marathon, like where you just want to complete the run just to say, yes, I did the run, maybe it's worth killing the crabs first. I thought that wasn't going to work, but then it did. Yeah, oh yeah, you usually end up in the floor like that. You just do a little jump to get out. If you're stuck in the floor, just a little jump will get you out. One more time. Without screwing up. And that's all there is to it. There is, I think, a faster way to do this. Like, I don't think the world record does it the same way, but the world record's also a little bit more precise. That method is definitely easier. All right. That concludes the GT Spacetime tutorial and explanation. Thank you for watching.